Good evening, everybody. We've got our webinar starting, and very, very quickly, I just want to make sure that everybody is registering, which they are. What I'd like to do is, of course, we've got three wonderful speakers tonight, and I'm going to kick up with Barnaby Joyce in just one moment, but I just want to sort of show you what we've been up against as we're doing the topic. Some of you will be aware that there have been some issues on the voice, but tonight is the no case for the voice. Make no mistake about that. So we're going to hear from Barnaby Joyce MP from the Nationals, Senator also from Tasmania, Duniam, and then Anthony Dillon, Aboriginal commentator and Indigenous Affairs commentator. For my part, I must admit that I'm the National Director of Christian Voice Australia, but I was also at one time Chief Executive of Tharawal Local Aboriginal Land Council, which taught me a lot about the thoughts and minds of a lot of Indigenous people. What I want to show you very quickly is one of my guests tonight was meant to be Warren Mundine. If you've seen the headlines on the weekend, he's been interestingly responding to some awful attacks. And I'm sorry to say that he won't be here with us tonight, and I totally understand that, and I want you to just bear that in mind, to my apology. But we did make the point that whenever we have people on our show, we're always at the subject of politicians travelling or whatever the case may be. All right, if I may just tonight then introduce Barnaby Joyce MP, the Nationals. I was going to say leader of the Nationals, but I better be careful. But Barnaby, welcome. What we want to hear tonight is the case for the no vote. There's a lot of talk about it. Over to you, and then we'll see how we go for time. Thank you, Barnaby.
Okay, thank you very much for all your attendance and your interest in your nation's democracy. I'd start by saying this is the biggest change that we've had, proposed change to our constitution and our nation's history. I've got probably 5 areas where I have huge problems with this. Number one, this is a constitutional change to reinsert race back into the Constitution. Make no mistake about it. This is going to divide Australia up into whether you're seen as Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And that creates real problems, especially for us in regional areas where people were born in the same hospital, went to the same school, went to the same high school, living next door to each other in a house. I mean, how do I explain to it that one person's entitled to basically 2 forms of representation in the parliament, and the federal parliament, the other person only gets 1? It's an anachronism. I think it should have been left in the 1950s, where we divide people up on race, on colour. People should be looked after by reason of the circumstances they are in, not on the colour of their skin. And so if there's a problem in Brewarrina or a problem in Alice Springs or a problem in Garbutt, we look after all the people in that area, regardless of what their race, their creed, their colour is. The next issue I would say is that this body, there's nothing that says it has to be elected. So we hear all the time selected. Something that has to have a major political power should be elected, not selected. And it should be elected by a general mandate of the people. Because it is selected, it opens itself up to people basically selecting friends or selecting people who have an association to them. Number 3, of course, it's in the Constitution. And it's in the Constitution, which means that the interpretations are done by the High Court, not by the Parliament. Parliament can say what it likes. Ultimately, it's the power of the High Court that interprets the power of the voice. Number 4, it's a big one. Hands up those who actually know what the voice is. Has anybody seen the legislation for the voice? And if you haven't seen the legislation for the voice, then that's very, very sneaky, because what's going to happen is that happens after the referendum. Now, when would you like to meet your wife or your prospective wife or your husband? Would you want to meet them before you go into the church, at the altar, or on the way out the door? Because you're meeting the voice on the way out the door. Finally, if it gets taken over by one side, I mean, of course, it has reference to the executive, and sometimes people don't understand what it is. The executive, of course, it's senior ministers, Minister for Health, Minister for Defence, Minister for Social Security, Minister for Agriculture, but it's also the governor of the Reserve Bank. It's the head of ASIO. It's the chief of the Defence Force. And a serious question has to be asked, why does this body need to be able to consult with the head of ASIO or the head of the Reserve Bank? The process that follows is, if we're going to change policy, we have to tell the Voice what we intend to do. Then they may come back to us and ask us for further information. And that will make things incredibly cumbersome and difficult. And of course, they can't veto. There's no doubt about it. The Voice can't veto. But what it can do, it says, you didn't consult properly. You erred on a certain area. You put too much emphasis onto another area. You left another area out altogether. Therefore, you haven't constitutionally consulted as you should. Therefore, I'm not vetoing your decision. I'm just ruling it out null and void. This is what the High Court will do. Just rule it out null and void. Now, of course, maybe I shouldn't, but I believe that bodies that are selected have the capacity to be owned by one side of the political fence or the other. And then if they sit in perpetuity as a constitutional body, and they're aligned to either the Labor Party or the coalition, you can't elect them out because they're not an elected body, not by you. We've had similar bodies like this in the past. ATSIC was one. If you look at the terms and guidelines and aspirations of ATSIC, you can almost overlap them to what the Voice is. The problem we had with ATSIC in the end with Jeff Clark is it became overtaken with nepotism, cronyism, corruption, and it was actually got rid of by a bipartisan, both Labor and the coalition. Now, if the ATSIC had been in the Constitution, we couldn't touch it, not without another referendum. And I'll close on this, colleagues. I live in Dangalmar. That's an Aboriginal word. Across the road from me is Weeabonga. Down from his Limbrae. Those was Aboriginal areas. I grew up with that. I'm not Aboriginal, but I grew up with Aboriginal people. I was babysat by a bloke called Aboriginal. The only reason I say is I'm not a bigot. I lived in Werris Creek, which is known as Werris Crook, Moree, Charleville, St. George. My neighbours were Aboriginal elders, potty waters. I sold my house to an Aboriginal family. So my life, and the only thing I'll tell you is I've seen these groups before where I bet you London to a brick, it'll make no difference to the kids at Cunnamulla, no difference to the kids at Borina. I've seen them come and go, and but what I think you will see is a clique of very highly paid people in Canberra, and good luck and God bless them. But I just don't. If you're going to make a big change, show us. Do it. Why wait for the Voice? Do it now.
Okay. Barnaby, I've got a couple of quick questions that people have already emailed me in, and I wonder if I could go to you and ask you those before I get on to Senator comment. But a quick question that people have written to me. If the Voice fails, what does that say for the future of PM Anthony Albanese?
I will leave that up to Mr. Albanese. What I really hope, I genuinely think that the Voice is going, this referendum's going down. Okay. I know a little about lots, but I know lots about politics, and I've been around for a fair while. This is going down. So Mr. Albanese should be a statesman and pull it up and say, okay, I'm not a goose. I'm going to pull this thing up. I'm going to stop it, and we'll have another crack at this later on, because if it does fail, it's going to create real heat. And I'm seeing it now. I mean, I went to NAIDOC week the other day, because these are people I grew up with, and this is what really hurts me, because I'm like them friends, and I thought I'd get smashed. I thought, they're going to yell and scream at me, and I was so humbled. I arrived there and I was with the crowd, and they said, Barnaby, can you come up and give a speech? So I walked up and gave a speech. Then I did the flag raising ceremony, and I was just walking around talking to people. People were so good. They were so decent. But I was one of the elders I was talking to from Tinga, and I said, I'm voting no. And he goes, yeah, we've heard that, Barnaby. And he said, I'm voting, yeah, I'll be voting yes, and I'm organising. I said, yeah, I understand that. And I said, one thing, if they just asked a different question and just thought about this would get up. And he put his hands in his face and went, yes, I know. There's overreach, massive overreach. And so what happens to Mr. Albanese, I don't know, and it's not my business, and that's for him to work out. What I'm worried about is what happens to our communities, especially in the areas where I live, because there's real heat, and we didn't need this. We could have done it in such a better way and not brought this sort of division that's come into it. And we've got to try and keep the show together.
Thank you, Barnaby. One more that someone written in, and then we'll move on. Somebody's written to me and said, and I quite agree with this, we've already got, I think, about 11 Indigenous people in Parliament, in the Senate and the House of Reps. People are saying, how many do we need in Parliament? Do we want 100%? Do we want 50%? Why do we need a voice if we've already got representation in Parliament as it is? I think you're breaking up, Barnaby. Yeah.
It doesn't worry me if we've got 100%. It doesn't worry me if that's great. What a lot of people say to me, like there's really strong pushback from sections of the Indigenous community. In my area, they're known as Aboriginals, the Aboriginal community. And they say, what do you think I'm sort of, and this is their words, what do you think I'm genetically deficient and need a constitutional walking stick, do you? Do you think I'm not capable of standing on my own 2 feet? You've got to put something in the Constitution because I'm not quite up to the mark. And they'll say, listen, mate, you just stay out of my way and watch me. And I think of, the Gibbses down at Dubbo, obviously Warren Mundine, who's been getting a pretty hard time lately. And there's so many people, the ones that get really irate about this are the ones that say, oh, you don't need, they find it patronizing. You don't need to say you need to help me. I'm very good at helping myself. I don't need to lean on your shoulder. Just stay out of my way. And the Aboriginal people who are in Parliament, what do you think? They're wallflowers. Do you think Jacinta Namatjira Price is a pushover? Or Pat Dodson's not up to the job? Or Marindela McCarthy, Barbara Marindela? I know Senator McCarthy forever. She was great mates with my former wife, who was actually a director of an Aboriginal kindergarten and played in the Aboriginal netball side. So they're not pushovers. The people in politics are quite good. And you know what else I know? There are others. There are other people who have part of it. I absolutely know this. They just don't tell you. They just don't say. They just say, it's kind of real. I know what I'm doing. I'm here, and that's my makeup out of it. But it's no one else's business. One of them is a very good mate of mine.
Last one, Barnaby, and I'll let you go. You made a very good point that the voice will do nothing for regional Aborigines. I tend to agree with that. But the question is, can you expand on your comment, which I liked, that it will create an elite in Canberra? Just expand on that for me.
I think what you'll see, to be honest, is people on $300,000 a year or much. There'll be 24 of them, and they won't be elected. They'll be selected. So, as I say, families at Cunnamulla, like you take my area. So my area, I've got Dungutty, Goulmary, Anawan, probably a bit of Wiradjuri, and up Bunjalung is up to the north. That's all just in my electorate, 12%, over 12% Aboriginal. So which one are you going to select? Which tribe are you selecting from? I'll give you a little tip. I've lived with all, they don't get along. So you pick one, watch out, because the other one's coming. I even go right down to families. Families don't get along. It's in my area, they'd say I'm part of the Moonbee crowd, and I'm not part of Tamworth, and I'm not part of Walker or Aaron. Well, Faulkner's, who was the elder in my area, would say I'm not part of either of them. I came from the hills. So what you'll have is a group of people highly paid, and they'll sort of be like a quasi House of Lords down there, sort of floating around. And when people are selected, guess what happens in the future? They select their mates. They select their mates into the jobs, and that's no good. That's why I need elected.
Thank you, Barnaby. I'm going to move on to the Senator. I know you've got another appointment, but feel free to take off when you need to. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay on. I'd like to introduce Jonno, if I may, Senator in Tasmania. Over to you, please, for your view on this particular no vote and why you think, as part of the Liberals, I guess, why why there is a no case for the referendum.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. And it's good to be with Barnaby, and it's also great to meet Anthony virtually for the first time. Look, why am I voting no, and why are many Liberals, if not most Liberals in the federal parliament, positioning ourselves to be asking Australians to vote no at this referendum? Well, there's a few basic points around that. Now, Barnaby's covered a lot of that territory because the Libs and the Nats are virtually on the same page with this. They got to their landing point a bit sooner than us, but, you know, good things come to those who wait. There isn't a single person on this webinar who doesn't fundamentally want to see every Australian, regardless of their race, their religion, their gender, their sexual orientation, or any other characteristic, to do the best they can. There isn't a single person on this webinar who doesn't want to help Indigenous Australians who are disadvantaged, who are living in rural, regional and remote communities, who don't have the benefits of a lot of other Australians. There isn't a single person contemplating the question that is before them now who doesn't want things to improve. But the key point for us is this voice isn't going to actually achieve the outcomes that those people want. They are, in a sense, being tricked into thinking that this will be the panacea. It will be the gateway to a whole heap of solutions that people are looking for to a range of problems, many of which have been in existence for a very, very long time, that are very complex and that require a lot more than just some simple, straightforward solution like a voice, which, as Barnaby has described, is going to be 24 or thereabouts, 24 people situated in major population centres, broadly speaking, up and down the East Coast, speaking on behalf of the rest of a certain group of Australians. As a Liberal, I have a fundamental belief that we are all equal before the law. For what it's worth, in my background, like I've been brought up here in Australia, sixth generation Tasmanian, but my wife came from Albania. And her family were an anti-communist family. And the stories they tell me about after they fled Albania and sought political asylum here in Australia, the stories they tell me about what happens when a government starts picking and choosing based on people's characteristics or beliefs, who has rights and who doesn't. Now, sure, this is a very different situation, but I do believe in the thin end of the wedge here when a government starts stepping in to confer special rights on people because of a certain characteristic or belief. I fear that if we go down this pathway, we will start frittering away one of the fundamental tenets that we have in our democracy, and that is equality before the law. As a country, we signed up to it in the UN Declaration on Human Rights, that regardless of your creed, your colour, your religion, you are deserving of and should be given full protection of the law on an equal basis, and every right that every other person in this country gets. By doing this, by inserting into our foundational document, our Constitution, we are putting in place an arrangement for a group of people who at birth are different from another group of people. And it isn't going to, as I said before, solve the problems that so many Australians are struggling with and looking for a solution to. I don't know how many people on this webinar would sort of look at this, because as Barnaby rightly said before, you know, there's no detail. We don't know exactly the scope, the depth, the arrangements that will be in place to support this. We don't know if these people are going to be elected or selected. And so, in effect, this question that is before the Australian people that will notionally vote on before the end of the year is going to be the biggest blank cheque any government has been given in living memory. Because all Anthony Albanese is saying, and proponents of the voice is saying to the Australian people, is just tell us you want the voice and we'll sort the rest out later on. Now, I don't know how many people on this webinar believe a politician when they say, trust us, we've got this, we'll fix this. Because it is one of those things I'm pretty sure is at an all-time low, trust in politicians. So if you don't trust us to get the tax system right, if you don't trust us to build roads, if you don't trust us to make basic decisions of government, how can you then turn around and hear Anthony Albanese say, well, we just want your permission to enshrine in the Constitution a voice that can't be undone, and we'll work out the details later on. And there are a whole range of issues with that could, well, we know will be unforeseen. To come to the legal implications of that, we've seen a range of submissions made by former High Court judges, King's counsels, silks, other legal academics who have all said There are some in favour and some against, but at the end of the day, you know, when you've got a divergence of legal opinions, you are going to be in for a lawyer's field day. Decisions made by government, which are then subject to potential litigation by the Voice because the advice of the Voice wasn't taken, may well find the Australian government and the people they represent wound up in protracted legal proceedings for many a year as a result of what is not a settled area of law. And there is no answer for those concerns. No one has been able to assuage those concerns on the part of those who've been expressing them. The fact that, and back to my first point, there are a range of issues we do need to address. If you look at the Closing the Gap report, you know, again, not one proponent of the Voice has been able to say, well, you know, the Voice is going to be able to deal with life expectancy or improve health and education outcomes or deal with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. This is how it's going to be able to do it and draw a definitive link between its work and what it will be able to do for and with government through to the solution we need. Not one proponent has been able to point out exactly how we might get to where we want to be through the work of the Voice. So here we are taking on all of this risk. Here we are taking a leap of faith to change our constitution, something that can't be undone except by way of another referendum. And I tell you what, if this gets up, there is no way it is ever being taken out of the constitution. And all to do what? To improve the lives of Indigenous Australians, but they can't tell us how it will do that. That is a massive punt that I think people are starting to see through and ask questions about. And when you hear people like Noel Pearson today saying, well, look, Australia has always got itself set to the no position. You know, we've got to flick the switch and go yes. But the thing is, Australians are thinking people. They stop, they consider, they tire kick, they sit round the barbecue, they go to the pub, they deliberate on these things and they figure out which is the right way to go. And so to just start with the yes position and hope that everything's going to be okay, which is what Mr. Pearson was sort of, I gather, trying to urge people to do. Just come with us on this journey. Well, again, the proponents of a proposition like this should be able to assuage the concerns of Australians, because you know what, if they did that, we'd then be voting yes. If it did all the things that they promise or say it will do, people would be inclined to vote yes, because again, at the foundation of all of this, Australians want all of their brothers and sisters, regardless of race, religion, skin colour, whatever it might be, to be having a good go of things and good outcomes as a result of that. So look, there's a bit of a thumbnail sketch of where I've come from in terms of my position on this and where the Liberals for No are at with this campaign.
Thank you, Senator. Very quickly, I know that Queensland, I'm with a referendum, majority of states, majority of voters. I know Queensland is one of the states that's very much opposed to the Voice. Do you have a feel as Senator for Tasmania what your state is thinking?
Yeah, look, I mean, Tasmania is not that different to other parts of the country, contrary to popular opinion. But, you know, you've got your population centre where, much like, say, Sydney or Melbourne, you might have people who are more inclined to support something like this, regardless of any arguments that are put forward. You go out into rural and regional communities where there are less public servants, less professionals who aren't dealing with a lot of the problems that come with living in remote parts of the country, and you find a greater degree of interest in, well, what does this actually mean and what's it going to do if we get there? So my sense, based on the polling that is publicly available, we were in the 60% plus support bracket for the Voice at the beginning of this debate. That has trended south in every poll since then. And my sense, based on the feedback I'm getting, is that, well, you know, yeah, we love the idea. We love constitutional recognition. We want to help our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We want things to be good here, but this doesn't sound like it's the model for me. And that's more and more the feedback I'm getting when you're out and about with, say, a Warren Mundine who was here a week before last, or Jacinta a week before that, or just on your own. So My sense is Tassie will probably vote no, and most of that will be in the north and northwest of the state. But there are people in the south as well who are similarly concerned about what this might mean and what it won't do.
Thank you, Jonno. I'm going to get to Anthony in a minute, but Barnaby, just a quick question. Do you think Queensland is reflective of the other states when there's a big opposition against the voice?
I think Queensland, yep, you got me. I think the issue is, look, this referendum is going to, the position for the Republic was a lot better than the position for the Voice at the similar time. And what happens, of course, is if you ask me, oh, which way are you going to vote? The first thing that goes through my head is, why do you want to know? It's none of your business. And how do I get out of this conversation as quickly as possible without you pestering me? So I'll tell you, rather than what I'm thinking, I'll tell you whatever I think you want to hear. So I'll say, oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely voted for the Voice. But the trouble is when they get to the polling booth, they go like hell. And that's what happened in the Republic. And that's what's going to happen here. So what you're actually seeing in the polling is actually overestimating where the yes case is. I'll bet you. And I can see that not only is this not going to win in the majority of states, it's not going to win on the majority of people. Victoria's just there. And so my question to Mr. Albanese is, well, why are you doing this to us? Just pull up, stop, because what's the point of going to a referendum that gets smashed? Now, he's got a bit of a problem because as Jonathan's right across it, because he's a senator, they spend a lot of time reading books over in the Senate. What you're going to have there is you've only got a certain amount of time after the ledge passes where you've got to have the referendum. And then you've got an actual drop dead moment too, where if it doesn't happen by then, it's the legislation's over. And you can't just change the question, on a whim. You actually have to go back to the Parliament, change the question, and then another time period starts. So so the only thing he can really do, he's got two choices: go forward with what he's got and lose, and then all the recriminations will start immediately the next day, and that'll be ugly and totally unnecessary. Or you can just say, okay, look, I'm not a fool, and do a Peter Beattie. I'm not a fool. This is not going to work. So we're stopping it right now. Okay, done. And we'll never have another yarn about this next year. But I really will then have an honest conversation with Peter Dutton. We're going to work out actually what will get through. And he's got to be big enough to sort of accept that that's going to be a big step backwards, but a big step backwards to success rather than a step off a cliff, which is where he's going now.
Thank you, Barnaby. All right, let's hear from an Indigenous voice. Now, I love Anthony Dillon. He described himself as an Aboriginal and an Australian. I was hoping the two would be the same, but Anthony, let's hear. I mean, Warren couldn't make it, so thank you very much for stepping in. Anthony, over to you on where we're at with the voice.
Right. Look, my two peers have covered it so well, so I'm left with very little to say. But so, there may be some overlap in what I've said, but I'll try to minimise that. I've tried to be very fair. And first of all, look, the confidence, like Mr. Joyce expresses, I feel we've got to be careful. As Mr. Abbott was saying today on Ben Fordham's show, let's not get complacent. There's still a lot of work to do. And I know nothing about politics, but I'm of the opinion that, generally speaking, people are influenced by what's happened, in the last few weeks before voting day. And so I wouldn't be surprised if come the referendum time, a week before, we see this commercial where you've got a couple of hungry little Aboriginal kids and you've got this celebrity standing beside them. We can make history. We want to do the right thing. Vote yes. And then the nation votes yes. So we've got to be careful, and we've got to keep putting forth logical, non-emotive arguments and counter-arguments, because don't underestimate the gullibility of much of the public. They'll be swayed very easily by emotion. And I've said it in a couple of articles where I've spoken about, I quoted the American psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who said, with this issue, we seem to have, well, he didn't say it about this issue, but I'm applying what he said to this issue. we seem to have the emotional tail wagging the rational dog. So there's a lot of emotion. And if you want to see emotion, well, first of all, we saw it. Hey, Mr. Albanese was, shedding a tear, or no, there was a lady with him shedding a tear the day after the election. And then we heard Linda Burney's speech the other week, where she was reading out the statistics and her friend who died, and that's going to play on people's minds. So let's just be careful. Okay, so my arguments, when there's a call for a voice, I'm just thinking they already have a voice. So that seems to be a fundamental error to begin with. Okay, now, if they had have proposed this whole thing, reframed this whole thing differently, like let's shake up the existing voices we've got, something like that, I'd be listening. But it's, they try and present it as if Aboriginal people don't have a voice. I mean, I have the same voice as everyone else, and more if I wanted to go in that path. So they are with their own voice, plus all those additional voices and mechanisms that allow them to express their ideas and that sort of thing. So right from the start, that's a huge error. So that was hard to get me to think yes. So I was thinking no from the beginning. Some of the other things is there seems to be this, we've heard about this overreach, what areas of life it will go into. But in addition to the overreach, I'm looking for the correct noun or whatever it is, and maybe someone can help me out here. There seems to be a overestimation or overstatement of what it will achieve. So I saw the exaggeration. So we saw Linda Burney say, I was looking for a much better buzz term than that, but that's certainly what it is, Mr. Joyce. But we heard Linda Burney talk about, we'd have had the voice, this could have prevented the problems we saw in Alice Springs. How? I want to know how. There was another MP, I think it was an MP in the Sydney Daily Telegraph on the weekend, I think, or maybe it was Friday. I forget her name. And she was saying the voice could be used to curb Indigenous suicide. Well, I mean, if that's the case, who wouldn't want to vote for it? But where's the detail? Where's the plan? So that irritates me. And then we have in the Yes pamphlet, we see these examples of, bush rangers. Okay, so I mean, you got these people who identify as Indigenous doing bushranger stuff, but I'm pretty sure they'd be doing the same stuff as what their white counterparts would be doing as well. And I don't think it's traditional knowledge that's handed down. Any bushranger knowledge they're using is probably about as old as dot paintings. So, which is a modern invention. And then they give this example of a school, and that school, the kids went on to, this robotics competition, and I was excited when I read that a while ago, before the Yes Camp grabbed it. That was a wonderful thing, but it had nothing to do with the voice. They had a great principal at that school, principal who was doing wonderful things without the voice. And I think, and the principal said, when you connect with community or something, lots of good things happen. Well, lots of good principals do that in their schools. And so I think what the Yes Camp were doing was but see that if we upscale that, I don't think they're the same thing. You really can't upscale those sorts of things to the nation and say, if you just put in these Indigenous voices, you'll get the right information, because we've had Indigenous voices for a long, long time. Not just statistic, but in all different departments and that sort of thing. And to me, it's what is important is not so much the voice, but it's the message. And there's been some good messages come from good people, and there's been some not so good messages. And I often think that it's the worst people with the worst messages have the loudest voice. So those bad messages, change the street name for this place, change the suburb name, ban coon cheese, don't use the term Aborigine because that's offensive. I still haven't worked out how that's offensive. Or don't say part Aboriginal, which I am. I still haven't worked out how that's offensive, but I'm told that's offensive, and we've got to have those terms removed and that sort of thing. So I think that's what many of them will focus on. And so I guess I've bored Barnaby. He's left. Is that correct?
No.
Yeah. Anyway. And Senator Jonathan, you're staying there out of politeness, are you?
No, Barnaby had to leave, Anthony, for another appointment.
Yeah, so I think the messages are going to be what we've seen for a long time. So we're just going to see more political correctness, and I think that's what's So I'm not saying we should never ever have advisory committees. By the way, this is as a legal friend told me on the weekend. She said, this is more than just a committee. Committees are sort of a gathering. This is a lot more than that. You've got lawyers crawling over all this sort of thing. So it's not just a committee. So anyway, I lost my train of thought. Oh, well, we've had these voices giving advice, and yeah, I'm all for the current crop of voices and departments, and that even some of the bad ones, let them be. But I would like to hear more of the good messages coming through. And for that to be effective, we do need, so we don't need this mechanism called the voice. We do need a government with backbone. Okay.
Yes.
I know Jacinta Price, my sister, actually, if her mother Bess calls me her brother, that would make Jacinta my niece or something. Anyway, so Jacinta has said, we need ears. They need ears, and I agree. Not only do they need ears, they need a bit of backbone. And I think even in the past, where we've had good government leaders, they've kind of buckled into the pressure sometimes of political correctness because, sometimes it's, and I can understand that. I just know that I've been in some venues and places at work where I've just shut my mouth. It was just so easier when someone starts talking about how they're a proud Aboriginal man, blah, 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 blah. And I just have to keep my mouth shut, even as a Aboriginal man myself. So I think with this new body called The Voice, we're going to see more of that political correctness. We're going to see more of that weight of, well, we're Indigenous, don't tell us what to do, because we, Indigenous people understand, only Indigenous people understand Indigenous people. And I've never seen evidence for that. I've certainly seen Indigenous people who understand Indigenous people, but not because they're Indigenous, because they've thought about these issues. So, just being Indigenous does not necessarily make you an expert in being Indigenous. So yes, there's the overreach, there's the exaggeration of what it can achieve. And I was just saying this today, we talk about the gap all the time. I've identified two other gaps, one which I've spoken about for many years, and that is not the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but the gap between well-off Indigenous and disadvantaged Indigenous, and that's the gap we've got to close. But the other gap, and I was asked this today in another interview, what would I hope the voice will achieve? What do I expect it will achieve? I said, well, right there, there's a huge gap between what I hope it will achieve and what I expect it will achieve. I would hope it would fix those problems which Linda Burney spoke about: education, employment, housing, and health. And again, who doesn't want those things improved? My two other colleagues have just said that. We all want the good things. So that's what I'm hoping for. But and I think Jonathan was saying it's not going to make any difference. Or if it doesn't make any difference, it'll be so minute that it's the kind of difference that probably just would have happened anyway. People get better sometimes, without an intervention, or when there is an intervention there, they get better, and we just automatically assume, see, it was the intervention that made the difference. No, well, actually, I'm probably going to get better anyway. Just like, 5 days after a bad cough, I start taking antibiotics and I get better. I was probably going to get better anyway. And I guess the final point for me to mention is, and by the way, I've written lots about this, so I encourage people to look at my writings on this. But I find it ironic, I guess, that we have the Indigenous architects of the voice, all of whom I have a great deal of respect, even though I disagree with just about everything they say on this topic. I do have a great deal of respect for them because you cannot deny that they are high achievers, and congrats to them. But it's interesting that they've achieved all they have achieved without the voice, without a treaty, without this truth-telling and all that sort of thing. And, you know, we'll probably save it for another time to talk about treaty and truth-telling. But the point is, they've achieved what they've achieved, great success, without the voice. They should be using their voices to say, hey, people, this is what you need to do in order to live in a safe home, know where your next meal is coming from, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I talk about that, you know, invariably this always raises the question, well, what is it we do? Or, you know, if the voice does fail, what do we do? Well, again, get a government with backbone, focus on what we know works, which is basically you've got to either take employment to the people, or take people to the employment in the case of some remote communities where it's just not viable to start up businesses and that. Although having said that, Warren Mundine, who is more experienced than me, he should be, he's about 60 years older than me. And but he's more experienced on jobs and that sort of thing. And he said he hasn't been to a remote community anywhere where he feels businesses can't be started. So anyway, he's optimistic. But, you know, if, say, there are some communities where you can't start businesses up because the people are, they've been affected by alcohol, boredom, they don't know what jobs and responsibility are through no fault of their own, maybe we have to sensitively move them to a hub. You know, it doesn't have to be a city, but just somewhere where there's still connection to country and that sort of thing, where they could be trained, or if they can't be trained, sometimes some people are too far gone, they can at least be looked after in safe, clean environments, or at least be given that opportunity to live in safe, clean environments. And also we got to say, look, you know, we will look after you, we'll pay for your bills for the rest of your life, but your kids have got to go to school, and we can guarantee there's a good school that they will go to, and you'll see them every day and all that sort of thing. So I think that, you know, in short, I'm no, simply because I just haven't heard a good argument from the yes camp. And, you know, I think most people have seen, or if they haven't seen it, they really need to see Mr. Albanese on the project, because that was sort of like safe territory for him. And the hosts could not be accused of trapping him or anything, but he just put his foot in his mouth. And when Linda Burney was interviewed by David Spears just recently, again, he was very polite and very respectful, and she just couldn't manage to sell it. So my reasons for voting no is, one, Aboriginal people, as far as I can see, are not without a voice. Even though Linda and the architects would use their voices to tell you that they are without voices, they do have voices. And we do, you know, Senator Jonathan said before, you know, the panacea, it's people are seeing it as that. And Warren Mundine said, you know, some people have this idea that it's a magic wand, because we have to believe that, because no detail's been given. It's just, here are the problems. We got the voice. It's the magic wand. It'll solve the problems. Well, I want a bit more detail than that.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I'm going to go to Senator in a moment. But Anthony, I did mention that I was chief executive of a local Aboriginal land council. I had 17 Indigenous staff. I've made a lot of contacts within the Indigenous community. I'm getting phone calls now, Anthony, saying, Greg, no one's asked me whether we want this voice or not. And these are Indigenous people. No one. They tell me we already have a voice. We have a voice with our local member of parliament. We have a voice at the ballot box, and we have a voice with the media. What else do we need to be doing? So I'm just passing that on to you. Are you finding the same sort of feedback or not?
Look, I don't. Strangely enough, I don't get to meet with that many people. But I'll just say this. Give this one quick anecdote. I was speaking with a colleague of mine recently, a professional person, and she was talking about an article I had, and I said, I'm obviously voting no, and she asked me why. I said, well, because they already have a voice. And her reply, and this is from a professional woman, was, yes, but look at all the disadvantage. So there seems to be this mental connection in their head that disadvantage equals need for voice kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. Senator, a quick question for you. I've not heard from either you or Barnaby or even Anthony, but that doesn't matter really. But what about the Uluru Statement from the Heart? They suggested a voice. Do you think this is the type of voice they were suggesting we should have? I'll take a comment from both of you. First, Senator.
Well, the Uluru Statement from the Heart included a lot of other things too. The Makarrata Commission, the Truth-Telling Commission, but the statement from the heart, as far as I recall, didn't specify that the voice was to be enshrined in the Constitution.
No, correct.
And to try and conflate constitutional recognition with a voice, which could be legislated, as it has been in other in state jurisdictions, is part of the. I hate using these words like tricky and things like that, but to say this is recognition, well, it's far more than recognition. If this were just recognition and there was bipartisan agreement around what recognition were to look like by way of the words to be inserted in the Constitution, then we would have an overwhelming majority of Australians who would vote yes to such a referendum. So there are other ways to give effect to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. They were the Prime Minister's first words on election night, and he said it 1,000 times since, and that is a promise he's made. I get that, I accept that. But in order to have recognition, he has a pathway, and he could do it with the opposition as well. We've said that. In terms of having a voice, there are other pathways as well. And we've said local and regional voices legislated, like the Langton report proposed as well. But because this has been a my way or the highway approach that's been taken, and there hasn't been a meaningful engagement with people who have everything ranging from concerns to complete opposition, we are left in this position where it's my proposition or bust. And when you have people like Father Frank Brennan and others who are saying, well, how about we tweak this by deleting this part of the proposal? It'll assuage a heap of concerns, and he's right. There's a huge number of Liberals who would probably then vote yes if there were some changes made to it. But they haven't wanted to do that, and so they've alienated a lot of people along the way.
Anthony, a statement from you?
Now, look, I'll just make a very quick statement. The Uluru Statement, I've looked over it several times, not for a little while, but it's just a one-pager. Now, I keep asking myself, am I missing something? Is there more to it? That is this just the version that's like the dummies version or the summary version or the executive summary version? Is there more to it? And I'm because it does seem to be they're giving it more weight than what it's got.
Yeah. Now understood. I wanted to raise that because the Uluru Statement said that the First Nations ought to have a voice to Parliament, but not the Constitution, I think, as you mentioned, Senator. So there's a big issue there. So you've got to be careful what you're quoting. The other question that's come in here is really asking, in particular, you, Senator, what type of issues do you foresee legally if the voice gets through? And there's been a lot of discussion about there'll be High Court challenges and what have you. From your perspective, can you just expand on that for me?
Yeah, so, I mean, anyone who's raised this concern has been poo-pooed as someone who is just scaremongering. The fact of the matter is, I don't think former High Court Judge Ian Callanan is a scaremongerer. He is a considered legal professional who's worked in the most serious area of law in our country, and that is constitutional law, as a High Court judge, no less. He's well regarded, and he has, along with many other legal professionals and experts, expressed concern on a range of levels. Former federal court judge David Jackson talked about
Senator, there'd be some who express concern behind closed doors as well, won't publicly do it.
And that's right. And this is part of the problem with the debate is if you go against the zeitgeist, you are very much labelled a racist. And a lot of people, and I've seen this in my short time in Parliament on other debates, people will put their head back down below the parapet. But thank God we do have the secrecy of a ballot box here to be able to express our views, and I hope common sense prevails here. But look, because of the way the proposition is constructed, in particular section 129 subparagraph 2, which basically is the part that makes everything subject to the advice, and when it is about giving advice to executive government, every decision that is made, not just the parliament, but the executive arm of our parliamentary system, that is when we are going to be bogged down in hot water. And I'll just make one other point on this. One of my colleagues made a speech in the House of Representatives. The member for Cowper gave his speech, and the next morning he wakes up, he comes into Parliament House, he opens up his Outlook, and he finds on his email an email sent from a Supreme Court judge in New South Wales lambasting my colleague for his opinion, and indicating how abhorrent he thought those opinions were. Now, there's a range of views you can have about that. Best case scenario, it proves judges, the people who apply our law, who interpret and apply our law, are human beings with emotions and opinions. Worst case scenario, it proves that amongst the judicial class, there are activists who will go and look for particular outcomes to derive from whatever situations before them. So to suggest judges and the courts are infallible has been blown out of the water by that one event alone. But look at the risk, and you only have to look at the range of opinions both behind closed doors and in the public domain to know how risky it is.
Thank you, Senator. A quick question. If you look at South Africa, people are saying, and we've got a very good question tonight, that the voice will institutionalise apartheid. What's your comment on that?
Is that to Anthony or me?
Both of you. Yeah, sorry, both of you.
Anthony, have a crack.
Anthony.
Yeah, I don't take that line. I don't think it'll be as strong as that. Look, I do think the no camp do need to be careful with those sorts of arguments, because they're the ones that the yes camp can get into a debate with and go back and forth.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, yeah. And my view has been, I have stuck to the points where I think it's quite clear. So for example, do Aboriginal people have a voice? Absolutely, undeniable. Just the fact that they are Australian, plus all those other things. So look, that's not a view that I hold.
No.
Or it's certainly not one that I promote.
Okay, thank you. And Senator?
Yeah, look, I agree. It's one of the, in terms of arguments that are made publicly, it can be a dangerous path to go down to project what could happen in the extreme. But I do accept the point that, and the last speech ever given in the Australian Parliament by one of my colleagues, Matthias Cormann, before he went off to the OECD, was about a comparison between East and West Germany, and how the same people who lived in the same environment, with the same genetic makeup ostensibly, the same privileges, opportunities, rights, etc., at one point in time became separate. And then by a matter of degrees over time, their trajectories changed. West Germany had a wonderful life, freedoms and great economic prosperity. Over the wall, over time, things became worse and worse and worse. And so I do subscribe to the thin end of the wedge argument, where things over time can become what seems unimaginable today. And by one step at a time, something that might be a gateway or a pathway to something worse, clothed up in a range of virtues, is something to be very wary of, because like the frog in the pot of boiling of water that starts out as cold and ends up as boiling, we could find ourselves in the same situation. So I'm mindful of that. That's why principles like equality before the law are so important to stick by. And by voting yes, you're voting against equality before the law.
Yeah.
One
last, sorry,
when you say
Anthony,
gateway,
yes.
yeah, Jonathan, when you say gateway, I think that's a good way of putting it.
Thank you. Anthony and Senator, last comment. People are saying that the voice will give the Indigenous people a voice within Parliament. But somebody has raised with me, and I was in a debate just the other day with an Indigenous person, and they were saying to me, why will it be any different if currently the Prime Minister, for example, or even the Cabinet or what have you, don't listen to Warren Mundine, they don't listen to Jacinta Price? How is it going to be any different if the voice gets in? In other words, the division is what's going to happen. Comment on that, please, Anthony.
Because can you just reframe that question?
Yeah. The Prime Minister is not listening to Warren Mundine at the moment, or Jacinta. If the voice gets through, how are those sort of people going to be having their voice heard?
Okay. And the Prime Minister has said it would be a brave government if they didn't listen to that advice. So, look, if the voice does get in, they'll be heard in one way or another, because while Warren and Jacinta may not be listened to, I wouldn't say they're not listened to on everything.
No,
they'll be listened to on some things, and just same as a white politician too. Some things will get over the line, some things won't get over the line.
Yeah, good point, Anthony. Senator, final comment?
Yeah, well, I think that question goes to the point we were making before, which is that there is a huge amount of risk here. A government might choose not to listen to the voice, and so therefore we'll find ourselves in this protracted set of legal, lawfare, basically. But in terms of people like Warren and Jacinta, I think the good thing is about the Australian community, if it's about them being ignored, as they are now in many respects, then common sense prevails a lot of the time. And I think you can see by how the numbers are tracking in the opinion polls around the referendum, that when these people go out and speak from, as Anthony has and others have, with some experience that others don't have, and it makes people stop and think, which was the issue I took with Noel Pearson's comments earlier on. You've got to flick the switch to yes. Well, hang on, give us a good reason, assuage our concerns, and you know what, we'll be on board. Tell us why this is good. But I don't think if it gets up, that'll change that for Warren and Jacinta. They'll still be able to speak from the heart with common sense and win the debate. Okay.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I do think that this is a vital piece of, a debate that we're having, because I think both sides have to be heard. But I think my constituency, the people that I involved with, are traditionally conservative. I think there's a general feeling that if in doubt, don't do anything. So that's the view that a lot of my constituency is telling me. I've got emails and letters coming into me. So I think it's important that we understand a lot of them are Christians, of course, or people of faith. And in that regard, I think that there's a real prayer to be had. So Anthony, thank you very much for your commentary. Thank you, Senator. And this is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube. So thank you very much. And hopefully everyone's heard your voice. So God bless and good night. Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.